doing the marriage retreat and treated the staff by doing lessons for us. Things that would pertain to our needs. Sam 2 years ago did a whole thing on practical ministry. It was phenomenal. But we also felt like with the Shapiros coming in, one thing that we had not ever addressed is the staff's mental health. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're always meeting the needs of other people, but how do we meet our own personal needs and meet the needs of each other? So we wanted to have the Shapiros, while they're here, taking care of everybody else, to kind of shepherd us a little bit. And we know we're putting them to some really hard work over the weekend, but I've guaranteed them it's going to be worth it, not only in relationship and friendship, but hopefully in some other ways that we can encourage them. So without any further ado, the Shapiros, have them come on up for us. And I'm just going to pray for us real quick and have these guys speak. Father, we love you. We thank you for this time. We thank you for the grace that you give, the mercy that you've laid upon us. We thank you for the gifts that you've given many, many disciples that we can meet each other's needs in ways that we couldn't imagine. Father, I pray you bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you to all those who, I thought we would know no one here. And we're going, we're going to meet all these new brothers and sisters. And Scott's like, don't you remember we used to live in your basement? And, we lived. I'm like, no, I don't. So forgive me if we've met before. But still good to see everybody. Thank you for having us. You act like it's some kind of effort on our part to get away from the office, come stay in a really nice hotel, and be around brothers and sisters. Like that's some kind of effort or sacrifice. So please continue in your delusion that we're being sacrificial. We'll really appreciate that. So we're going to talk first. This is great because we have all the leaders alone. And what are these things, we need to talk about when no one else is around?
Yes.
To leaders. Self-care. Self-care. So why are we even talking about this? Because everywhere we go, we see these poor, worn out, overused, overworked, exhausted. Yeah, present. Raise your hand if that applies to you. And I'll hand out business cards. So this is obviously a need in any helping profession, right? Any helping profession. You run the risk of burnout and what they now call compassion fatigue. Which the way I phrase it is, I'll come home some days after seeing patients, I'll say, honey, my milk of human kindness is drying up quickly. So, that's called compassion fatigue and burnout. And it's a really pervasive thing in the helping professions. So Mary and I were in private practice for 30 years. Only recently did we close up shop, leave our private practice, and we now work in a medical school that teaches brand new doctors. So these are brand new minted doctors that are in our facility for a 3-year family residency program. I'm the only behavioral health guy on the faculty, so I'm on them all the time about this stuff. Because these poor new doctors are overworked, they're underpaid, they're, just killing themselves, slaving to death, and so we have times where I just meet with them and I say, you're off the clock, you're not under scrutiny, you're not taking a test, let's just talk. They love that. I always make sure they have things to do that are fun, that are different from, not part of medicine. So I'm preaching the same thing to them as I am to you. Amen. This is going to be foreign territory to some of you because I know you guys. You're so into helping, pouring yourself out, being ministers of the gospel that you will wear yourselves out to death. And then we won't have you, you'll be feeble and sick and, so, but that's okay because we've got new guys like Seth coming along. So let me start out with some questions. Think about leadership in the church. Think about like the church leader, I don't know what we call them now, evangelists, ministers, galactic subsector leader or whatever. What are some of the responsibilities? John has galactic sector leader. Yes, thank you. So what are some responsibilities of that guy, the evangelist, the church leader? What are some of your responsibilities?
Brings up others.
Brings up others, trains others. All right.
Studying the Bible with a lot of people.
Studying the Bible with tons of people. Yeah.
Preaching and teaching.
Preaching, teaching. All right.
Discipling. Church growth.
Church growth, discipling, big vision church growth. So not only are you discipling day to day each person, but then you have to have the big vision, right?
Event planning.
Event planning, oh my goodness.
I was gonna say,
All right.
organizing.
Which is, event planning is like a profession in itself. We have people that do that full time, not as part of another job, full time.
On the female perspective, you're sort of mother, sister,
Thank you,
counselor,
Mary.
teacher.
Thank you.
Yep.
You name it.
Candlestick maker.
Right. Pretty much every family member you could name that has some amount of authority. Yeah. So, what's the deal? That doesn't sound too bad. I mean, yes, it is. I'm being sarcastic. That's like, do you realize how much stuff that is that you're responsible for? Yeah.
We forgot budget and finance.
Oh my goodness, right? How could I forget that? Yeah, but I'm sorry? Family?
Family.
Oh yeah, your own family?
Family.
Oh, I forgot about that. We have a family. Like, what are those smaller versions of us? Oh yeah, kids. We've got kids. So you've got to deal with all that. Now, what if you're an elder? Do you have elders in Baltimore Church? Yeah. Okay, so you have elders or elders in training. So what's their duties? In addition to all that stuff, shepherding. And
Taking care of them.
taking care of the leaders.
I really expected to have answers to everything. Yes.
Oh, and you
When
don't?
you look at an elder.
I'm sorry. I always thought that was I always. Yes, it's our job to have answers to everything. You guys can take yourselves off the hook. When I was an elder in the Athens church for so many years, I said one of my jobs was to absorb hostility. That was one of my jobs. Because if someone had a complaint about the church, and believe it or not, people would have complaints every now and again.
Really?
Right.
So.
I felt like my job as one of the elders was to defend the other leaders and take the and not take it personally. So I guess what I'm saying is church leadership, write this down because it'll be revolutionary to you, is not an easy task. Church leadership is not an easy task. If you're in training to be in church leadership, just get ready because you're in for stress and you're in for pressure, whether you like it or not. You know what the sword of Damocles is? You ever hear that? So I want to tell this story. So Damocles was this servant to a king in the 4th century, King Dionysius. He was the only reason I know that he was king of Syracuse in Italy was because I'm from Syracuse, New York, so that sticks in. So Damocles was King Dionysius' servant. So Damocles was envious of his king, all his luxuries, and all the stuff he got to do and all the power he held. So one day he's talking to Dionysius and he's saying, I really admire all, oh king, he was being, obsequious and servile, oh king, I admire all your glory and power. And Dionysius says, fine, you want my throne, you've got it. I'm going to let you be king for a day. So Damocles is all excited about this. So what he does is he turns over his throne, but he gets a sword, this big heavy sword, and he gets the hair of a horse tail and ties it to the end of the sword and ties the other to the ceiling over the throne. So Damocles is sitting on the throne trying to enjoy all this opulence, but all the time he's got this sword tenuously hanging over his head. The point being is when you're a leader, you always have that sword over your head that could drop at any moment and run you through the heart. So I'm just letting you know that's a pleasant. Yes, I really hope that's been encouraging. But you're under the sword of Damocles. But don't say this didn't happen without warning, because if you look in James 3:1, James 3:1 says, not many of you should become teachers or leaders, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. So that's that sword of Damocles right there. So, not only are you under more pressure with your congregants, but with God. So once again, just take it easy. I don't want to stress you out just by telling you. So, God bless you for pursuing the ministry. God bless your heart for pursuing the ministry. Daniel 12:3. It says, those who are wise, that's you guys, will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, who are you guys, like the stars forever and ever. So yeah, you're under the sword of Damocles, you're under a lot of pressure. That was Daniel 12:3. But God enables you, God favors you, respects you, loves you for what you're doing, and so do we. Now, I can say, we've been all over the world. Mary and I have never met an evangelist, ministry leader in this movement who doesn't care about people. It's kind of a, it's kind of a prerequisite, right? You have to care deeply about people to be in this position. So you bear on your heart the burden of however many people you have in the church. And men, in particular, I've observed, throw all they can into ministry. They are all in all the time. They give it everything they got, and it's exhausting. The problem is they're men, and they have a male ego. And the problem with the male ego is this, that they equate exhaustion with righteousness. The more exhausted I am, the better a job I've done, and the more righteous I am. You see? It's your metric for whether or not you've been effective. That was a Freudian slip. So your metric for whether or not you've been effective is how tired I am. And if they wear themselves out and make themselves sick, that's like, awesome. Now I'm a martyr. I can add martyrdom to my, the medals on my chest. Now write down Philippians 2:17. What does that say? But even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you. So you read that, being poured out, right? But what do you think? You're equating poured out with wear out is the problem we see in the ministry. As if the definition of pouring yourself out is using yourself up until you're this frazzled ball of nerves and you don't have any energy to go on. So that's just the church, I'm just saying, it seems to be our church culture. Luke 9:23, here's another one we use to defend our own martyrdom. Luke 9:23, then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Some people think denying yourself means mistreating yourself. Okay, you misunderstand the word deny yourself and you say, oh, as long as I mistreat myself and wear myself out, that's what he's talking about. You equate overwork with righteousness. And then you feel guilty if you don't do it. If I'm not exhausted at the end of every day, I haven't done something right. Is that right? So I see Dion systematically throwing her husband under the bus by nodding at everything. So that's good. So that's like I'm suffering on behalf of God. You know what we call that? We psychologists call that the martyr complex, right? You got a martyr complex. When suffering means I'm doing the right thing. So I'm preaching to myself here as well because I've got the martyr complex. That's why I became a psychologist. I want to be needed and, I want to feel like I gave my all for the benefit of all mankind. That when I die, I can, early of a heart attack or a stroke, then I can feel good about my life. So if you're that way too, please continue to do so, because then Mary and I will continue to have business, and I'll give you a business card. Just have good insurance or a good credit card. Now, women ministry leaders, Mary could and has in the past done a whole class on that issue. Women tend to be even more self-sacrificial, right? The difference is they don't have the sense of pride men have. They are truly humble servants for the most part. Their whole identity and their sense of pride isn't wrapped up in it the way it is for men. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. Okay. They actually have purer motives and more humble hearts, by and large, I've found. But consequently, they even end up, so they don't have the benefit of having their ego stroked, they end up even in worse shape often. In fact, Mary, in years past, and it seems to come in waves depending on what's going on in our movement, has had a very active practice treating women's ministry leaders. There have been some years where we proposed building a tunnel from our office to this or that church, so that the women we could just shuttle them more quickly back and forth to the office. So I don't think God intended it to be this way. How do I know? Let's read our Bibles. So go to Exodus 20. Every time you get a Jew up here, we're going to go Old Testament. I'm just warning you. That's the way it goes. So I'm just saying that's my culture right there. So Exodus 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." That is a scripture about rest. Rest. What a concept for church leaders, rest. The whole notion of rest. It's like a foreign notion. How many of you feel rested right now? Go ahead, raise your hands. Good, because you don't look rested. So if you were going to raise your hands, I was going to call you out on it. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not here saying, "Oh, yes, I feel so refreshed after," this is a tough job you're doing. God rested. God rested. Now, did he need it? No. He's God. He didn't need it. It's not like he exhausted himself in the act of creation and said, "I need a break, so I'm going to take tomorrow off." That's not the way it worked. I think God did this as a model for us. He mandated rest. Why? Because he knew that we would have a propensity to work ourselves to death. Now, working yourself to death, it sounds noble, like we're pouring ourselves out for other people. But mostly, you know why we work ourselves to death? Not because we're noble people with great hearts. It's mostly because we're worried people. Yeah. And we feel like if we don't work really hard all the time, we're going to be bankrupt or we're going to go to hell. One of those two things. So it's not like we have noble intentions for working ourselves to death. We just do it because we feel compelled to do it because we're worrisome people. So I'm saying as disciples, and please feel free to refute this, but I think we've trained ourselves to be guilty if we're not exhausting ourselves. Okay, point made. But serving God, I really believe, doesn't mean ignore your own needs. And I believe that God wants us to take care of ourselves spiritually, physically, and emotionally. Why? So that we're better equipped for works of service. Does he want a broken down, exhausted, we're supposed to be God's hands and feet and eyes and ears. Does he want those organs exhausted? No, he wants fresh, energetic people to serve him. So I think he wants us to take care of ourselves. That's why he mandated rest in the Old Testament. So the Sabbath day was a mandate. It was a law. You don't break that law. He mandated rest. But here's what's interesting. You know what he did long before then? He mandated rest in our bodies. He made our bodies so that they have to rest. Yeah. You ever wonder, why did God make us need sleep? He's God. He could have made us so we went 24 hours a day. But I think he made us so that we needed restoration, a time of restoration. So by giving us the need to sleep, God forces us to rest and to be quiet. And during that time, if you know anything about sleep physiology, a lot of important things happen while you're asleep. Hormones are secreted, muscles are repaired, cognitive connections are made, memories are formed. So a lot of important things happen while you're asleep. You can't forsake sleep. And Mary, we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Same thing so God mandated rest in our bodies by giving us a need to sleep. What about eating? You ever wonder why God made us that we needed to eat? Because to me, I call myself a subsistence eater. I'm not one of those people that loves eating. most of the time, it's a pain in the neck. You know, you have to stop what you're doing in the middle of the day. I get really grumpy if I don't have lunch, but then I'm like, I have to go get lunch, and then I'm grumpy getting lunch. So it's a big waste of time and money, and you know, I don't love eating unless it's a Subway 12-inch on white, cold cut trio with everything on it. Now, that's the only thing I enjoy eating that. Other than that, to me, eating is kind of a, you know. So I've often wondered, God, why did you make it so 2 to 3 times a day we got to stop what we're doing and eat? It's because he wants us to rest. And he wants us to take at least a few times a day where we sit down and do something together. We commune together. That's what eating was meant to be, a time of communion. So we do that with our families, or you should be doing that with your families. When we teach parenting classes, we're big on the family meal thing. It's a very important thing. So we do that with our families. We do that with our congregations on Sunday. You know, God made us have to stop at certain times during the day. Stop what we're doing and rest. Eat. So he really gave us you see what I'm saying? He gave us no choice. He built it into us that, like it or not, we better rest or something really bad is going to happen. Right? Now, we can't take this to the extreme. That's why Jesus in Mark 2 said what about the Sabbath? He said, I'm sorry? I didn't hear it. Mark 2, 23 through 28.
And he's Lord of the Sabbath?
Lord of the Sabbath. And what's the purpose of the Sabbath? It's created for us, not the other way around. The Sabbath was made for us, not as a ritual to be followed legalistically. It was rest. It was mandated rest. Now, in the Old Testament times, Jews used the Sabbath for exactly that, quiet Bible study. That's how they took care of themselves spiritually. So once a week, on Saturdays back then, they would congregate and study the Bible. That's how the first century Christians always knew where to find them. You know, if you want to find a Jew on Saturday, you go to the temple. That's where they are, and you can evangelize. So Bible study, no question, number one way to take care of yourself spiritually. Okay, this one we all understand and we all do pretty well on. It's your vitamins, it's your food. Most of us get up first thing in the morning and study the Bible and are happy to do it. It's energizing, it connects us to God. It's spiritually restorative, right? We understand that as disciples. However, it's not the only way. It's an important way to take care of yourself, and it's a necessary way to take care of yourself, Bible study, and it must be done, but it's not the only way.
Right.
And I'm not blaspheming by saying that. There are other ways to take care of yourself. So, at this point, I would like to introduce a topic that is dear to my heart, that makes my point, and this is the subject of hobbies. Having hobbies. Now, my wife will tell you that I collect hobbies like a philatelist collects stamps. Philatelist. All right. Stop using that joke. All right. So I have hobbies. I tend to move. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Yeah. Some of you know what that is. So Mary will tell you I tend to move from hobby to hobby. There are some that are lifelong hobbies that I've always done that will never leave me. There are some where I get deeply into it. Now, when I get into a hobby, dude, I get into it. I get all the magazines. I do all the research. I spend all the money, unfortunately. But hobbies are very important. Why? Because when you're doing them, certain hobbies, and I'm talking about active hobbies. Let me make a distinction. An active hobby is a hobby that demands your mental energy, often your physical energy. I'm not talking about video games and passive hobbies like that. Those are, sorry. This brother has been falsely accused, okay? You just made an assumption there. So an active hobby is one that distracts you, where during the time you're doing it, you can't think of anything else. Now, this is a principle. Psychology has a technique called mindfulness. You ever hear that? So mindfulness and mindfulness training We teach people to quiet their minds and focus on the here and now. You can't think about the past and worry about stuff that's already happened. You can't think about the future and worry about stuff you can't control. We teach people to focus their minds on the here and now. Then we teach them to, if you have a thought that pops in, a worrisome thought, instead of fighting it and saying, oh no, I'm having a worrisome thought, that's not mindful, what do? You just let it pass by. So I'll tell my patients, imagine you're sitting in a room, it's this big white room, and you're the only person, and there's a chair, and you're sitting in this chair. There's a door on your left and a door on your right. This room is totally empty. You're in the here and now. If a worrisome thought comes in one door, you don't panic. You just say, oh, that's interesting, and you kind of usher it out the other door. We even teach kids to do this. We teach kids to imagine they're sitting on a bank of a river, and when they have, so they're peaceful and quiet. Whenever they have a thought, you pretend it's a paper boat, and you put it on your little paper boat and you let it drift down the river. So that's mindfulness. It's not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future, focusing on the here and now. And we use kind of meditation exercises, like listening and stuff like that. So when you're doing certain hobbies, they're very mindful. For example, like one of my many life, true to life hobbies for me is motorcycling. When you're on a motorcycle, you can't, by definition, you can't think of anything else. Because if you do, you're dead. So it's one of these activities where it demands all your attention, all your concentration. Now, you're also living in the moment, because if you don't, you'll be dead. So while I'm riding, there's the scent of the trees and all you're concentrating on is taking this turn better, or looking far enough ahead so you don't get killed. So yes, and I know it's dangerous and blah blah blah, yeah, and you all had aunts and cousins and friends that don't tell me all that stuff. Just focus on why motorcycling is a mindful activity. That's right, and it's very refreshing. It's very restorative to me. You get on the motorcycle, and I'm going to invoke great leaders like Sam Lang, Steve Johnson, who will agree with me on this very point. Okay, so it's an inarguable point. But that's just one of these many mindful activities. So for 25 years, I did martial arts. When you're doing that for an hour a day, all you can concentrate on is, how do I get this kick higher? How do I, I'm trying to learn how to fly fish. What I'm really learning is that I'm really bad at it. And I'll fly fish and fish will congregate to ridicule me. They're like, who is this guy? They'll laugh at me. But that's not the point. The point isn't catching the fish. If you watch movies like A River Run Through It, the point of fly fishing is you're out in nature, you're close to God. You're doing the whole thing about casting and fly fishing is that rhythmic, it's this rhythmic playing out of the line, and so I don't care if I catch fish. Well, I do, because I look stupid if I come home with an empty basket, but you see what I'm saying? Mindful activities like that. Yeah. Mary was a ballerina for 40 years. I guarantee you when she did her ballet, she wasn't thinking about anything else. That's what makes it so awesome. And now she does stuff like Zumba and, yoga and stuff like that. So these are mindful activities, hobbies that are good for you mentally and physically if it's an athletic pursuit, and spiritually. So that's why I'm big on hobbies. I really believe that God gives us stuff like that to do. It's not a selfish thing, it's an important thing. Here's the problem. You all think that those things, because they're fun, they are indulgences. And you feel guilty when you're doing them. Don't you? Oh, yeah. So this is what you have to do. You have to take this out of the indulgence. I'll do it when I have the time, when, this person isn't struggling or that Bible talk leader isn't doing, Take it out of the category of when I have time and put it in the life or death, I must do this category. Please do that. So at this medical school we work at, one of my jobs is to interview. Every year we get a new crop of brand new doctors, and we have to interview. So we place 8 doctors a year in this residency program. We interview like 90 of them to get into those 8 slots. My colleagues, the rest of my colleagues on the faculty, ask them, what are your medical board scores? You know, how did you do on all your residencies and rotations? All that stuff. You know what I ask them? What do you do for fun? Because I want to make sure they're sane. You know, I want to make sure they're going to be with us and not get so consumed by their occupation that they become shriveled, tired, or ineffective. So it's very important to me to make sure they have something that has nothing to do with medicine that they're passionate about. So that's what I'm urging you to do, is to make it a priority, a life or death priority, to find something that has nothing to do with ministry that you can be passionate about. Sacrilege, blasphemy. But really, you'll be healthier, and you'll be able to work for many more years if you do that. Now, I should say, in justification again, sometimes your hobby becomes a ministry opportunity. Like wherever I go, if I'm not dressed up, I wear a motorcycle branded shirt. You know, how many people just come up and say, oh, I ride one of those, or what model do you have, something like that. So it's a ministry, it can become a ministry opportunity. But that's not its primary function. So for your own sake, I'm just asking you to please find something like that. Mary.
So I'm going to ask you guys to give me a little grace this morning, because I got up early this morning, got my cup of coffee, studied my notes for 40 minutes to the wrong class, which I just found out about 10 minutes ago. So I'm going to be a little note dependent this morning. I'm ready for tonight's class, however. I am so ready for tonight's class, all right? So just bear with me, okay? So let's start out in Mark 12, verse 29. You know, when Jesus is asked by one of the teachers of the law, what is the most important commandment? What is he telling? With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, right? And I love the way that is phrased, because the fact is that God created us as human beings with those 4 aspects to our personality, to who we are as living beings. You know, we are people with emotions, with a heart, right? We're people with souls, we're spiritual beings, we're intellectual beings, and we're physical beings. Now, the problem with us is that usually we, as Christians, we try to take care of the soul part, right? I mean, that's what we're all about. We're taking care of the soul part. We usually are doing something to take care of the intellectual part. You know, we're going to school, we're reading books. I think what we have neglected is our emotional selves and our physical selves. And I'm going to be talking this morning specifically about taking care of yourself physically, how to take care of yourself physically. Now, like Michael alluded to, I think the problem as disciples is we think if we're taking care of ourselves physically, that this is somehow being selfish, right? Right?
Yeah.
That we're being unspiritual in some way if we're taking care of ourselves physically. But the Bible teaches that how we deal with our physical self is very important. Turn over to 1 Corinthians 6 in verse 19. And it says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. Now, obviously, the context of this is avoiding sexual immorality. But there's a principle here that God does care about what we do with our physical bodies, right? I mean, he cares about this. You know, this is my temple of the Holy Spirit. It's the only one I'm going to get. That's her temple of the Holy Spirit. It's the only one she's going to get. You know, God cares whether we take care of ourselves physically or not. So let me get personal. How's your diet? this is not rocket science. I mean, you can't turn on a TV set or pick up a magazine or look at anything on the internet without us knowing what we're supposed to be doing with our diets, right? Yeah. More whole foods, less processed foods, less sugar, less red meat. You know it, right? I mean, there's nothing here that I can tell you that you haven't heard 100 times. And for me, when I read some of that, the gluten-free diet just makes me have the jitters. I mean, when I read that, God bless people that have to follow it, but you can get overwhelmed when you're reading some of the nutritional stuff, right? You get very overwhelmed. What I want to encourage you to do is to change the one thing you're doing wrong that's hurting you. One thing. Make a commitment to change the one thing that is harming you physically. For some of us, and for a lot of people in our congregations, they may be dealing with significant eating disorders, anorexia and bulimia and things like that. We've got to help each other address those things. I mean, people die from these illnesses. People literally die from these illnesses. So it's got to be something that we help each other with. Get the help that you need if you're dealing with one of these. If you're helping someone that's anorexic, encourage them to go get treatment for this. These are serious illnesses. So we can't overlook the diet part of this. The diet part of this is super important, super important. There's all kinds of studies now about that cancer is actually an inflammatory process, right? Have you guys read those? And sugar is one of the main contributors to that. To that inflammatory process, I mean, just educate yourself and decide you're going to do something that's going to be healthier for you, okay? Just make the changes you need to make in that area. How's your exercise? We all know, we're all pretty good about exercising, a month before we go to the beach, because it makes us look better, right? Right? But that's not really, I mean, that's a little tiny component of exercise, of the benefits of exercise, is how we look physically. That's a little tiny component, weight control and all that stuff that we think about. Let me give you a whole nother way to think about exercise. One of the psychiatrists at Harvard, named John Rady, has stated that exercise is the single best thing you can do for your brain in terms of mood, memory, and learning. The current research suggests that exercise reverses the detrimental effects of stress at a cellular level and reduces cellular aging. Working out also reduces emotional stress by keeping us from ruminating. They think when we exercise that we reroute the blood flow to parts of our brain that are associated with worry and rumination. So when you get home at night and you are super worried about whatever it is that just went on that day, get on the elliptical. I'm not joking. I mean, Michael and I do this all the time. We run into the house and go, I'm going to hurt somebody. I'm going to go, I'm going to go get on the elliptical for a few minutes. I mean, you've got to get rid of this stress, okay? You've got to get rid of this stress. Listen to this one. Research indicates that burning 350 calories 3 times a week through sweat-producing activity can reduce the symptoms of depression about as effectively as prescription antidepressants. Wow. That's huge. That's huge. When I start seeing someone in therapy for depression, that's the first homework assignment I give them. It's 3 times a week. I want you doing some kind of cardio, something that you can tolerate for 30 minutes. That's the first homework assignment I give them. Kids and adults. All right? So this is big stuff, all right? Again, we're not talking about just looking good in the swimsuit, all right? We're talking about keeping our brains healthy. Complicated physical activities such as dancing, which is my favorite, playing tennis, yoga, those kind of things, increases the growth factors in the brain, that when we do those kind of activities, we actually grow new connections between the neurons in our brain, which improves learning and attention. So if your kids are having trouble with attention and learning in school, put them out, unplug them from the electronic, and put them outside in the yard playing soccer or basketball or something, okay? Exercise produces endorphins, which are natural painkillers, which most people know about that. Exercise improves brain functioning and may ward off some types of dementia. The Alzheimer's Research Center reports that exercise appears to protect the hippocampus, which is the first area of the brain that succumbs to Alzheimer's. In 2000, there was a Dutch study that researchers found that inactive men who were genetically prone to Alzheimer's were 4 times more likely to develop the disease than those that carried the trait but exercised regularly. All right? So if you want your brain to be healthy, you've got to put exercise on your schedule. Okay? If you want your mood to improve, you've got to put exercise on your schedule. If you want to stop worrying all the time, you've got to put exercise on your schedule. Like Michael says, this has got to move from the if I get everything else done column, which is never ending, right? To the I have got to put this in my schedule. This has got to be something that I do on a regular basis.
Amen.
Okay? Okay. And like I said, what we recommend is at least 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. Michael and I pretty much exercise every day because this is just the tip of the iceberg of the research that's coming out on the benefits of exercise. So we pretty much, we cheat every now and then. We go, are you going to exercise today? Nah. Are you going to? Okay. No, we're not. Okay. But that's that is the concession, is that we don't exercise, not the other way around. Are you getting adequate sleep and rest? Michael mentioned this. You know why I love teaching this class? It gets really quiet sometimes. And it is just fun to watch. I love it. As a culture, we are terrible about getting adequate sleep and rest. The current research in the Western Hemisphere indicates that between 35 and 50% of adults get less than 7 hours of sleep a night. And if you go below that 7 hours of sleep a night, the sleep researchers consider that you're in sleep deprivation. Less than 7 hours a night. Now, it varies a little bit from individual to individual, but that's kind of their earmark. They count you as being sleep deprived. So let me tell you what sleep deprivation will do to you. Now, I know. You sometimes have to study the Bible late at night. You sometimes have a meeting that runs. I get it. I understand. Now that's going to happen. I'm talking about your regular sleep habits, okay? Regular sleep habits. If you are sleep deprived, you have an increased risk of diabetes and hypertension. You have an increased risk of obesity. They think that sleep loss makes you crave like high carb and high sugar foods to give you more energy. The risk of stroke quadruples if you're sleep deprived. The risk of death by accident is increased because what they think happens is if you're sleep deprived, you have what they call micro sleeps, where you fall asleep for just a second. But if you're going through a busy intersection at just that second, all right, you're more likely to have an accident. Or if you're walking down the stairs at just that second, you're more likely to have a fall. There's an increase in depression and other psychiatric problems. We'll talk about later today, we're going to talk about bipolar disorder. Sleep health is one of the major things to control bipolar disorder. If you are sleep deprived, you're making the condition much, much worse. So people with bipolar disorder have to be very strict about their sleep schedules. There's an increase in cortisol, which is our stress hormone, which, attacks our hearts, attacks our organs, all of those things. What I'm telling you is sleep is super important. And here's the deal. When we got baptized, we did not become superhumans, okay? We didn't get the cape, we couldn't fly, I can anyway, maybe you guys can, but, we somehow think because we're Christians, this does not apply to us. And this does apply to us. As Michael said, for a long time I saw sisters in the ministry in my office. They were exhausted. They didn't even know what they enjoy doing anymore. You know, when I would ask them, what do you do that you just enjoy? I would get this blank look, you know. They were totally stressed out. They were physically, a lot of times they had psychosomatic illnesses like fibromyalgia, you know, chronic pain syndromes, you know, and they were at the end of their rope. The end of their rope. Many of them had to be hospitalized. A few of them lost their marriages. You know, I mean, this was not a joke. You know, they had totally and completely worn themselves out. That is, like Michael said, I don't believe that's what God wants with us. I don't believe that's what God wants with us. So please take this stuff seriously. If you're a mom, especially, are you getting regular medical checkups? Or a man, by the way, who are also terrible at this. You know, we're really good. What I'm saying is we're really good with our kids. You know, our kids go and get the well baby checks, and we never miss one of those. But with us, sometimes we ignore it. You know, I haven't seen a doctor in 3 years, and I'm proud of it. You know, no, that's, you know, no, you know. You know, the point of all this is it's not the Hollywood, we've got to look great and we're going to live forever. You know, that's not it. All right? That's not going to happen. You know, the point of this is how long can I serve God to the best of my capabilities? To the best of my capabilities. You know, we have a friend that's a brother that's a doctor, a physician, and he said, God has your days numbered, but you can shorten that number if you're not careful. You know, so that's the way we need to think. I want to live out the full number of days that God has planned for me.
If you don't mind, let me follow up on a couple of points that occurred to me. I use the example of, when it comes to physical health, your body, it's on loan. You don't own it. It's on loan from God. It's the rental car that God put your soul in so you could serve him for these years. Now, if that's true, I kind of wish he'd put me in a earlier model, but, you know, a slicker looking. But, you know, hey, I take what I got. So, but we wouldn't mistreat something God has given us. God gave us these bodies as soul transportation until we're done here. So you have to, I mean, a lot of us take better care of our cars than we do of our bodies. We take better care of our pets than we do of our bodies, right? And certainly we take better care of our kids, as Mary mentioned. We're on top of it with their appointments, but not with ours. So that's one thing. The other thing is I just want to re-emphasize the exercise thing because, I mean, come on. You think this comes easy? That's why we exercise every day. So I'm just saying that. The other thing is, I'm just saying. I have to work on this. Yeah, that doesn't come easy.
Talk about it.
Let me add a thing about sleeping, because it's easier for you to hear all that and say, oh, easier said than done. Why do most people have trouble sleeping? Is because they lie in bed and think. They lie in bed and worry. So here's a thing you should do, and I've begun to recommend this to my patients that have trouble sleeping. 2 hours before you go to bed, sit down with a piece of paper and you get all your worries out then on your paper. Now here's what you do. You write them all down, things I have to worry about. Then you look at each one and you say, can I do anything about this right now? Yes or no? If I can't, can I ever do anything about this? Yes or no? If I can, but it has to be later, when can I deal with it? You write each of these worry things down and the answer to those questions. Can I do anything about this right now or not? And if I can, does it have to be immediately, right? That way, when you're lying in bed worrying, you can tell yourself, oh, well, I already worried about that. I already told myself can't do anything about that, so I'm going to take it off my lying in bed and worrying about list. Okay? So do the worry list thing 2 hours before you go to bed. Here's another piece of advice when it comes to what we call sleep hygiene. No screens for an hour before you go to bed.
Thank you.
Because, I'm sure you've heard this, but blue light stimulates the optic tectum, which is a part of your brain that governs your sleep-wake cycle. So screens will mess you up, so no screens. Also, I'll just throw this one in really quickly. There's something, if you're lying in bed and you're worrying, don't lie in bed. Because then you start associating the bed with misery and torture and torment, right? If you're lying there, now a lot of people think, well, at least I'm getting rest, but you're not. Your little mind is racing. Get up and get out of the bed so you don't associate the bed with sleeplessness, right? Go do something else. Read. Don't play tennis. Go read, do something quiet. And then when you're tired, then go back to bed, okay? Now let me add one more thing. You know why this problem is endemic to ministry leaders? Because you don't have a set schedule. It's a double-edged sword. One of the blessings and curses of being a ministry leader is you set your own schedule. The blessing is, that's a blessing. The curse is, because you do that, you abuse yourself. Now, I'm preaching again to the choir when we were in, one of the reasons we closed private practice after 30 years is because when we were in private practice and in business for ourselves, do you think I said, oh, good, I'm working for myself. I can take all the time off I want. I can take a vacation whenever I want. I can be home early. Oh, yeah, I might have said that at start, but you think that's the way it turned out? No, because I was in business for myself and didn't have someone telling me when to do what. I pushed myself harder. I hadn't been home. One of the reasons I like my current job is prior to 5 months ago, I hadn't been home before 7:30 in 30 years. So here, but you're wowing me, but it's the same problem with you guys because you have no boss. Because you don't have a boss saying be in at 9, be out at 5, and you have 30 days off, paid days off, because you don't have that structure. You're more at risk to abuse yourselves, okay? And go, you get a call from a disciple late at night, something like that, okay? So we're going to talk about that more in a minute when we talk about boundaries. So, case made, point made. All right. Last few words on taking care of yourself spiritually and emotionally. James 5:16. It says this: therefore confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. Confession of sins leads to healing. And in fact, it's one of the things Christians do that people in the world don't do, which is why, by and large, believe it or not, Christians are much more mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally healthier than the world, okay? However, this little segment is not about confession. You already know how important that is. My point is this: to whom do you confess? To whom do you confess? Usually your closest friends, right? Proverbs 17:17, who knows that by memory? A friend loves at all times. Thank you. And a brother is born for adversity. To remain mentally healthy, you gotta have friends, close friends. Now, the reason this is a problem for y'all more than your average congregant is because ministry leaders rarely have peers, right? You're kind of at the top of this pyramid. Everyone looks for you to have answers, and everyone looks at you as perfect, right? So you're at the top of this pyramid, whether you want to be or not. Very rarely do you have people at the same level of experience, age, experience in disciple. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. It's hard for ministry leaders to have peers. But you gotta have them. You gotta have friends. In fact, let me tell you why. God created us to be social. God created us to be social animals, to be dependent on each other. That is readily evident if you've read the Bible for more than 8 minutes. However, there's some research that says that the lack of friendships is a huge, not just for the individual, but it's a sociological conundrum. So there's this guy, Tom Rath. He's director of the Gallup organization you've heard of. The Gallup organization is a polling, they poll people to get statistics and data on important issues. So Tom Rath did this study. He said if you ask people why they became homeless, he polled homeless people, and why their marriages failed, or why they overeat, So broad spectrum here. They often said it was because the poor quality or non-existence of friendships. But what does that have to do with poverty and overeating? And it just does, because we're supposed to be social animals. So this friendship thing is a big deal. When you feel unloved or you don't have a peer to talk to, it's a big deal. So he did this other study about friendship and came up with these statistics. I want to read for you some of the most interesting findings. One thing they found out is if your best friend eats a healthy diet, you're 5 times more likely to have a healthy diet yourself. If you have a best friend that eats healthy food, you're 5 times more likely to eat healthy food yourself. I remember reading that and thinking, well, that's weird. But then I thought about my own friendships. So my best friend, the guy that converted me, Greg Garcia, who some of you know, when we lived in Athens, you know, he and I would go out to lunch pretty routinely. And he's all into eating healthy. So I'm all ready to order, you know, I'm hungry at noon, I'm all ready to order something really bad. And he'll get the quinoa salad or, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'll have what he's having. Even though it looks disgusting and is not satisfying. But it's that peer pressure, you know. So the fact is, if you have friends that eat healthy, you're more likely to eat healthy too. So that's a benefit of friendship. Here's another one. Married people, I presume these are people that have been married for a while, say that friendship is more than 5 times as important as physical intimacy within marriage. And I think you know what that means. 5 times more important than physical intimacy is the friendship between husband and wife. We're going to talk about that tomorrow too. What? I'm sorry? Yes, I don't know. I'm just going to assume. I also, once again, I assume it's for us older people. What? In the presence of the wife. Here's another one. Oh, this is interesting. Those who say they have no real friends at work have only a 1 in 12 chance of feeling engaged in their job. Conversely, if you have a best friend at work, you're 7 times more likely to feel engaged in your job. So when we were in private practice, it was just Mary and me and our office manager. We had the same office manager for 28 years until she finally retired. God bless her for putting up with us for that long. So then for the last 2 years of our practice, we hired this lovely young girl who was very friendly and sociable. But I felt bad because she's just in here with 2 old people. Right around the time we hired her, I had a colleague move in across the hall. And our offices were connected by a hallway. So all of a sudden, I started noticing that the office manager next door, who is the same age as our office manager, is showing up all the time. You know, and they're having this like water cooler talk, you know. And on one hand, I'm like, and this other girl really liked to talk. So on one hand, I'm like, stop distracting my office manager from important work. But then on the other hand, I thought, you know, she's got to have a playmate. She's got to have a playmate. And I remembered this piece of research. So I was like, go ahead. As long as you get your work done, I don't care how often so-and-so is over here flitting around, you know. But so it's just a thing because I knew about this research. So you're more likely to feel engaged in your job if you have friendships. And that goes for the job of ministry as well. So once again, Proverbs 17:17 is it's like God figured out psychology long before psychologists did, you know. I mean, the Bible is full of brilliant psychological principles like the importance of friendship. But, you know, granted, friendships are hard to build and they're hard to maintain, even the good ones, right? They take work, they take some effort. I'm just saying from a cost to benefit ratio, it behooves you to work on these friendships. And, you know, I won't go into detail, but this, you know, Greg, my best friend, do we get along all the time? Heavens no. We have what I call our yearly marital squabble, you know, where he and I will get totally sideways about something, and it'll just blow up, and then we got to resolve it, and, you know. But it's worth it. It's worth it to me, because I got to have my best friend. I got to do whatever it takes to maintain my best friend. I've got to forgive. I've got to, you know, humble myself. I've got to, you know. So I think you get the idea. So for your own sake, take it's usually those brothers or sisters that were there when you were baptized that are your strongest friends, and cultivate those friendships. And I would advise you to give that same advice to people in your congregation, because it's important not just for the leaders. Okay. That having been said, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to say another little, some caveats about being in the ministry, things to watch out for, landmines we can help you avoid, and then if it's okay, if we have time, we'll do kind of questions, answers, and comments, okay? So here are some caveats on working with people in the ministry, particularly people with mental health problems. And this evening we'll talk about some of these mental health problems. But I wanted to talk to the leaders first about things you can do and things you can avoid getting in trouble in when you work with people with mental health problems. Number one, keep your role clear.
Yeah.
When you're a minister, you're a minister. You're not a therapist. You're not a physician. You're a minister. You're the leader of a church. And you have an individual responsibility to that particular person, but you also have a responsibility to your congregation. And you have your own reputation to be responsible to, all right? So we've seen ministry leaders fall into the trap of overstepping their wisdom and their knowledge and their, in the good-hearted intention of helping someone with a mental health problem, but they go too far. You're not the person's therapist. There's got to be a point where you say, I am above my pay grade right now. I'll do everything I can to help you. I'll do everything I can to find help for you. I'll drive you to your therapist's office, but I'm not your therapist. Like I said, I think we'll talk about this more this evening. So for your own mental health, be very clear about the limitations of help you can provide. Now, here's a related point. You ever hear of transference? Something called transference, right? So Sigmund Freud discovered it. Thanks, Sigmund. He noticed that, so Sigmund Freud, if you know anything about him, he was actually a neurologist, but eventually he got into psychoanalysis and, thought it was cool. Most of his patients early on, as he was coming up with his theories of psychoanalysis, were rich, middle-aged Viennese women. And he started to notice that sometimes the women, if they had an attitude about somebody, whether good or bad, would transfer that attitude onto him. So if they had abusive husbands, all of a sudden they're treating him like he's the abusive husband.
Sure.
If they needed a father figure, they treat him like he was a father figure. If they needed, sexual fulfillment, so there's all these bad things, and he calls it transference. As a ministry leader, as someone in authority, God-given authority, you are always a potential victim of transference. It is a huge landmine. Have you ever given a sermon, and then someone comes up to you, and you get this tirade of, what did you mean by that? Or, and you're like, what? Where did that come from? Very often, especially, and I'm just going to say this, not in a sexist way, this is a psychological observation, especially with male ministry leaders, evoking trust issues, if a female person in your congregation has a history of trust issues with men, that's a big transference thing. So they'll come up to you, what did you mean by that? And you're like, so what I'm saying is sometimes that happens, don't take it personally. You may be hearing this person's past speaking, so don't take it personally. But also, don't put yourself in the position to foster it. Because some of us, we so want to help people, we'll do anything to help them pass this. But you have to keep your boundaries clear. This is why, I don't know about you, but I have a thing against male ministry leaders counseling women.
Amen. Praise God.
Tell me if that's wrong, but it's this minefield of potential transference that scares me to death. In all the 30 years we were in private practice, I never saw Mostly we work with kids, but of the adults we work with, I would never see an adult woman in therapy. They would go to Mary. Same thing with adult men going to me. Now there's one exception. I saw this lovely lady for like 30 whole years. I saw her in therapy. I kept telling her, another 10 years we'll be good. We'll get this fixed. So anyway, so there was this one exception. Otherwise, no. I don't. A lot of my colleagues, psychologists, are all touchy-feely, huggy, positive affirmation stuff. I can't. It was my thing. I would shake a hand of a patient, female patient, or a patient's mother. We work with kids, so it was often their moms. No hug. I didn't even hug my office manager, who we knew for 28 years. The kind of person she was, if I tried it, she'd hit me in the nose. So, but I mean, it's just this boundary thing. It's this boundary thing. When you're in a helping profession and emotions are high and fences go down, this is a big problem. And you know what's the worst potential landmine is something called countertransference, which is when the person is transferring they're projecting their needs and wants and emotions onto you, and you respond in kind. Because some of us love to be needed. I do. And we love to be looked up to and love to be seen as authority. The worst thing that can happen is then you go in the other direction. Now your needs are being met, so you encourage this transference relationship. We've seen that lead to adulterous relationships, huge conflicts of interest. So it's a boundary thing. All right? So, once again, it's keep your boundaries clear. I heard we were at a workshop last week, and I heard an interesting class about boundaries. And they were interviewing this expert. It was a video. And she said there's no freedom without boundaries. And I thought about that, and I said, that's really true. If you don't have boundaries, you're going to get sucked into every emotion of every person in your congregation at all times of day, and you're not going to get rest. Then the interviewer asked her, what are boundaries? And she said, it's when you define what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. That's what a boundary is. So, in other words, it's not acceptable to call me at 3 a.m, if you're having an emotional breakdown, because I'm not a therapist, okay? If you call your own therapist if you have one, or you go to the emergency room. It's not acceptable for me to counsel you, sister, alone in the, So boundaries are you just establishing what's acceptable and what isn't. Once you do that, you're free. You don't have to worry about being sucked into, being called at all hours or being sucked into an uncomfortable situation. So boundaries are very important. It's very counterintuitive for helping professions, We want to give our all. We want to open our lives up. We want to be at everyone's disposal. You're going to ruin yourself physically, spiritually, emotionally, and you're going to get into an inappropriate boundary realm of boundaries. So I hereby confer upon you permission to set boundaries, which is something that the ministry leaders are really bad at. Here's another thing. Enabling. So please don't, if you have people in your congregation with mental health issues, please don't enable them. And what I mean is this. We get calls all the time from people all over the country with mental health problems who want to talk to a disciple. I get it. The problem is, a lot of times, who am I hearing from? The ministry leader. So I'll get on the phone, the ministry leader will say, I've got someone in my congregation that's got this problem, this problem, this problem. And we talk about it, and then they say, so can I make an appointment for that patient? And I say, no, that's not your job. Besides, the person has got to have some skin in this game. Do you want to get well? If this person wants to get well, they got to have some skin in the game. Yes, I know they're overwhelmed emotionally and they have this problem or that problem, but they've got to show some commitment to treatment. So what I tell the ministry leader is, fine, have that person call me. Just have that person call me directly. Don't make an appointment for this person. Just have them call me. Then they usually do, and I'll have them email, we'll get email back and forth about what exactly your problem is, then we try to help them. So don't enable. I've seen people troublesome, I don't mean this in a bad way, people with problems in congregations get everyone else, they're chasing their tails, while that person kind of sits back and lets it happen because they feel entitled to it. You know, you're my ministry leader, this isn't my job, it's your job to help me. So they get everyone in a congregation chasing their tails while they don't do much to help themselves. So this is a warning against enabling. You're not helping anyone, least of all you, if you do that. So you steer them in the right direction, and then they can get help or not. I just wrote a chapter for a book that Wyndham Shaw is putting out on. It's a book about eldership issues. I wrote a whole chapter about this, how to help people get psychiatric and psychotherapeutic help when you're in a leadership position. So shameless plug, so I don't have to say it all now, just go buy that book when it comes out. Last thing, if anything you've heard today or tonight when we talk about mental health problems reminds you of you, please do something about it. Ministry leaders are not immune to mental health issues. They're not immune to depression, anxiety, or anything, schizophrenia. I mean, there's you guys are not immune. When you were appointed, you didn't get a cloak of invisibility or, you're not Superman. You have these problems too. Now, you're more likely to hide it or conceal it because you don't want to look weak in front of your congregation. But the worst thing you can do is struggle with a mental health problem yourself and not do anything about it. You're not helping you and you're not helping anyone in your congregation. So I'm just saying, physician, heal yourself, or minister, heal yourself. I've just seen it. I've seen a lot of guys in ministry, and they'll call and they'll say, I've been dealing with this for years, but I just thought I'd soldier on. Usually men. I'm just going to soldier on because that's what God requires of me. No, God requires of you that you're in good health, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional.